Elena Martinez stared at the marriage contract spread across the mahogany desk, her hands trembling as she gripped the expensive pen. At 23, she had never imagined her life would come to this moment, signing away her freedom to save her family from financial ruin. Alexander Blackwood, 50 years old and worth billions, sat across from her with an expression as cold as winter steel. His grey eyes showed no emotion as he watched her internal struggle. The CEO of Blackwood Industries had built his empire through calculated decisions, and this marriage was simply another business transaction. "The terms are clear," Alexander said, his deep voice cutting through the silence. "You'll have your own wing of the house, a generous allowance and complete freedom, as long as you fulfill your public duties as my wife." Elena's father had accumulated debts that threatened to destroy 3 generations of her family's small restaurant business. The medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment had pushed them beyond recovery. Alexander's proposal had arrived like a devil's bargain, marriage in exchange for clearing all debts and ensuring her mother received the best treatment available. She thought of her mother's frail hands, her father's defeated shoulders, and the weight of responsibility that had fallen on her young shoulders. The pen felt impossibly heavy as she signed her name with careful strokes. Alexander's expression didn't change as he witnessed her sacrifice. He had his own reasons for this arrangement, reasons buried deep beneath layers of corporate success and personal isolation. The board of directors had been pressuring him about his image, and a young, beautiful wife would silence the whispers about his private life. Neither of them spoke as the contracts were sealed, binding them together in a union built on necessity rather than love. The cathedral bells echoed through the morning air as Elena walked down the aisle in a dress that cost more than her family's annual income. The ivory silk felt foreign against her skin, and the weight of the designer veil seemed to press down on her shoulders like the burden of her new reality. Hundreds of guests filled the pews, business associates, socialites, and members of high society who had come to witness Alexander Blackwood's surprising marriage. Elena recognized none of them. Her own family occupied just 2 rows, looking overwhelmed by the grandeur surrounding them. Alexander stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, his silver hair gleaming under the cathedral's stained glass windows. He watched her approach with the same detached professionalism he brought to board meetings. There was no warmth in his gaze, no hint of the man behind the corporate facade. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision. Elena's voice barely rose above a whisper as she recited vows that felt hollow in her mouth. When Alexander slipped the platinum wedding band onto her finger, his touch was brief and impersonal, like a handshake sealing a business deal. The reception that followed was a blur of congratulations from strangers and forced smiles for photographers. Elena moved through the evening like an actress playing a role she hadn't auditioned for. Alexander remained by her side, playing the part of the devoted groom with practiced ease. As the night wore on, Elena caught glimpses of something deeper in Alexander's eyes during unguarded moments, a flicker of loneliness that mirrored her own. But whenever their gazes met directly, his expression would return to its familiar mask of indifference. The wedding cake was cut, toasts were made, and promises were spoken, but Elena felt more alone than ever before. The Blackwood estate sprawled across 15 acres of manicured grounds, its Georgian architecture imposing against the evening sky. Elena pressed her face to the limousine window as they approached her new home, feeling like she was entering a beautiful prison. Alexander had been silent during the drive from the reception, his attention focused on his phone as he handled business calls. Even on his wedding night, work took precedence over everything else. Elena wondered if this was a glimpse into their future, 2 strangers sharing a house but living separate lives. The mansion's interior was a testament to wealth and refined taste. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors, and priceless artwork adorned the walls. Everything was perfect, pristine, and utterly intimidating to a young woman who had grown up in a modest apartment above her family's restaurant. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, greeted them at the entrance with professional courtesy. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and an efficient manner that suggested she had been managing the household for years. "Your wing is prepared, Mrs. Blackwood," she said, the title sounding strange to Elena's ears. "Mr. Blackwood thought you might prefer to settle in privately." Alexander nodded curtly. "I'll be in my study. Mrs. Henderson will show you to your rooms and explain the household routines." Without another word, he disappeared down a corridor, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the grand foyer. The sound of his footsteps echoed and faded, emphasizing the vast emptiness of the house. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "Come along, dear. It's a big change, but you'll find your place here." Eleanor followed her up the sweeping staircase, wondering if she would ever truly belong in this gilded cage. 3 months into their marriage, Elena and Alexander had perfected the art of living as strangers under the same roof. Their interactions were limited to public appearances and brief encounters in the mansion's corridors, where they exchanged polite nods like distant acquaintances. Elena's days followed a predictable pattern. She woke in her luxurious suite, ate breakfast alone in the smaller dining room, and spent hours walking the estate's gardens or reading in the library. The loneliness was suffocating, but she had learned to find solace in small routines and the kindness of the household staff. Alexander left for his office before dawn and returned well after dinner, often carrying the stress of corporate battles in the tense line of his shoulders. Elena would sometimes glimpse him through the windows of his study, working late into the night with only the glow of his computer screen for company. Their public appearances were carefully orchestrated performances. At charity galas and business dinners, they played their roles flawlessly, the devoted young wife and the successful older husband. Alexander's hand would rest possessively on her lower back, and Elena would smile adoringly at his side. But the moment they returned home, the facade crumbled. The media had initially been fascinated by their unlikely pairing, but as months passed without scandal or drama, interest waned. Elena was grateful for the reduced attention, though she sometimes wondered if anyone would notice if she simply disappeared from Alexander's life. Mrs. Henderson had become her closest confidant, offering gentle guidance and understanding without judgment. The older woman seemed to sense the loneliness that both Elena and Alexander carried, though she never spoke of it directly. In quiet moments, Elena caught herself studying her husband's face, searching for glimpses of the man beneath the corporate armor. The charity auction was in full swing when Elena noticed Alexander's unusual behavior. Throughout the evening, he had been more attentive than usual, his hand lingering on her arm when he guided her through the crowd, his responses to her comments more engaged than the polite acknowledgments she had grown accustomed to. When the auctioneer announced a vintage violin, Elena's breath caught. She had played violin throughout her childhood, though her family could never afford a quality instrument. The longing in her expression must have been transparent, because Alexander raised his paddle without hesitation. "Alexander, no," she whispered, but he continued bidding until the violin was his. Later, in the limousine, he handed her the case with an expression she couldn't decipher. "You looked like you wanted it." Elena's fingers traced the smooth wood of the case, overwhelmed by the unexpected gesture. "You didn't have to." "It's nothing," he said, but his voice lacked its usual coldness. That night, Elena played for the first time in years, her fingers finding their way across the strings in the mansion's music room. The melody filled the empty spaces of the house, carrying emotions she couldn't put into words. Unbeknownst to her, Alexander stood in the doorway, drawn by the haunting beauty of the music. Something stirred in his chest, a feeling he had buried so deep he had forgotten it existed. The young woman he had married for convenience was revealing layers of depth he hadn't expected to find. When Elena finished playing, she turned to find the doorway empty, but she could have sworn she felt someone watching her. The violin had created a bridge between them, though neither was ready to acknowledge it yet. The call came at 3 in the morning. Elena's mother had been rushed to the hospital with complications from her treatment. Elena's hands shook as she tried to call for a car, her mind racing with fear and the desperate need to reach her family. Alexander appeared in her doorway, having heard her distressed voice through the mansion's quiet halls. He was dressed in pajama pants and a t-shirt, his usually perfect hair disheveled from sleep. For the first time, Elena saw him as something other than an untouchable corporate figure. "What's wrong?" His voice carried genuine concern. Through her tears, Elena explained about her mother's condition. Without hesitation, Alexander grabbed his keys. "I'll drive you." The hospital corridors were sterile and cold as they rushed toward the intensive care unit. Elena's father embraced her with relief, his eyes red from crying. Alexander stood back, observing the family's pain with an expression Elena couldn't read. For hours, they waited in uncomfortable plastic chairs while doctors worked to stabilize Elena's mother. Alexander had remained, despite Elena's insistence that he could leave. He sat quietly, occasionally bringing coffee or speaking in low tones with medical staff to ensure Elena's mother received the best possible care. When the doctor finally emerged with positive news, Elena collapsed with relief. Her mother would recover, but it had been a close call. In that moment of overwhelming emotion, Elena found herself leaning against Alexander's shoulder, and surprisingly, he didn't pull away. His hand came up to rest gently on her hair, a gesture so tender it made Elena's heart skip. For a brief moment, the walls between them crumbled, revealing a man capable of compassion and a woman who desperately needed comfort. Neither spoke of the moment afterward, but something fundamental had shifted between them. In the weeks following her mother's health scare, Elena noticed subtle changes in Alexander's behavior. He began joining her for dinner occasionally, their conversations evolving from polite small talk to discussions about books, music, and their different perspectives on life. Elena learned that Alexander had built his empire from nothing, working his way up from a poor background, not unlike her own. His success had come at the cost of personal relationships, leaving him isolated despite his wealth and power. The revelation made Elena see him in a new light, not as the cold businessman who had bought her compliance, but as a man who had sacrificed everything for achievement. Alexander, in turn, discovered Elena's intelligence and strength. She wasn't the naive young woman he had assumed her to be, but someone who had made an impossible choice to save her family. Her selflessness both impressed and humbled him. Their evening walks through the estate gardens became a routine. Alexander would point out different plants and share stories about the property's history, while Elena talked about her dreams of traveling and her love for literature. These conversations revealed depths in both of them that had been hidden beneath their arranged marriage's formal structure. One evening, as they sat by the fountain watching the sunset, Alexander made an unexpected confession. "I never expected to enjoy your company." Elena turned to study his profile, noting the way the golden light softened his features. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" A rare smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps." The moment stretched between them, filled with possibilities neither was ready to voice. They were no longer just two strangers bound by contract. They were becoming something more complex and infinitely more dangerous to their carefully constructed emotional defenses. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning, splashed across every financial newspaper and business website. Blackwood Industries was under investigation for alleged financial irregularities, and Alexander's reputation was being torn apart by media speculation and competitor attacks. Elena watched from the breakfast room as Alexander paced his study, his phone pressed to his ear as he managed crisis after crisis. His usual composure was cracking under the pressure, and she could see the toll the accusations were taking on him. Despite their growing closeness, Elena felt helpless to offer comfort. This was Alexander's world, a realm of corporate warfare and high-stakes maneuvering that she couldn't navigate. She could only watch as the man she was beginning to care for fought to save everything he had built. The investigation intensified over the following days. Alexander worked around the clock with his legal team, barely eating or sleeping as he prepared his defense. Elena found herself worrying about his health, bringing him meals he barely touched, and watching him grow thinner and more haggard. One night, she found him asleep at his desk, his head pillowed on a stack of legal documents. Gently, she covered him with a blanket and dimmed the lights. As she turned to leave, his hand caught her wrist. "Stay," he whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. Elena settled into the chair beside his desk, keeping silent vigil as he slept. In the morning, Alexander woke to find her still there, and something shifted in his expression. A vulnerability she had never seen before. "You didn't have to stay," he said softly. "I wanted to," Elena replied, and they both understood that her words carried deeper meaning than simple concern for his well-being. The reporters ambushed Elena outside the hospital where she was visiting her mother. Cameras flashed and microphones were thrust in her face as journalists shouted questions about Alexander's alleged crimes and their marriage arrangement. "Mrs. Blackwood, is it true your marriage was a business transaction? Did you know about your husband's illegal activities? Are you planning to divorce him now that his empire is crumbling?" Elena's hands trembled as she tried to push through the crowd, but the reporters pressed closer, their questions becoming more invasive and cruel. Finally, something inside her snapped. "Stop!" she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. The cameras focused on her as she straightened her shoulders and faced them directly. "Alexander Blackwood is the most honorable man I know," she declared, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He built his company through hard work and integrity, and these accusations are nothing more than attempts to destroy a good man's reputation." The reporters fell silent, surprised by her passionate defense. "My husband has dedicated his life to creating jobs and supporting charitable causes. He has never compromised his principles for profit, and anyone who knows him would tell you the same thing." Elena's words were broadcast across every major news network, and the public response was immediate. Social media exploded with support for the young woman who had stood up to defend her husband against overwhelming odds. Alexander watched the coverage from his office, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. Elena had chosen to stand by him when she could have easily distanced herself from the scandal. Her loyalty meant more to him than any business victory he had ever achieved. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former employee of Alexander's main competitor approached the legal team with evidence that the financial irregularities had been fabricated. The investigation had been orchestrated by rival companies seeking to destroy Blackwood Industries and steal their market share. Alexander's vindication was swift and complete. The real perpetrators were exposed, and the charges against him were dropped with full apologies from the authorities. The media that had crucified him now praised his resilience and integrity. But the victory felt hollow to Alexander. The crisis had shown him what truly mattered, and it wasn't his business empire or his wealth. It was the woman who had stood by him when the world turned against him, who had defended his character without being asked. Elena was in the garden when Alexander found her, sitting by the fountain where they had shared so many evening conversations. The setting sun cast golden light across her face, and Alexander was struck by how beautiful she looked in that moment. "It's over," he said simply, settling beside her on the stone bench. Elena nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I knew you were innocent." "How could you be so certain?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious. Elena turned to face him, her eyes serious. "Because I know who you are, Alexander. Not the CEO or the billionaire, but the man who drove me to the hospital at 3 in the morning, who bought me a violin because he saw me looking at it, who works himself to exhaustion because he cares about his employees." Indeed, Alexander felt something break open in his chest, a wall he had built around his heart, crumbling under the weight of her words. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the full force of his emotions. "Elena," he whispered, reaching for her hand. The words had been building inside Alexander for weeks, pressing against his chest like a physical weight. As he held Elena's hand in the garden, watching the last rays of sunlight dance across her face, he knew he couldn't contain them any longer. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "About why I really proposed this marriage." Elena's heart raced, but she remained silent, sensing the importance of this moment. Alexander's grip on her hand tightened. The board pressure, the image concerns, those were real, but they weren't the whole truth. He paused, struggling with words that felt foreign on his tongue. "5 years ago, I saw you at your family's restaurant. You were serving tables, laughing with customers, and you looked so alive, so genuine in a world full of artifice." Elena's breath caught. She remembered that night, a well-dressed older man who had dined alone, leaving an unusually generous tip. "I couldn't forget you," Alexander continued. "When my investigators mentioned your family's financial troubles, I saw an opportunity to help you while solving my own problems. But I told myself it was purely business." "And now," Elena whispered. Alexander turned to face her fully, his grey eyes intense with emotion. "Now I know I was lying to myself. I think I've been in love with you since that first night I saw you, and this marriage gave me a chance to be near you, even if I couldn't have your heart." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. The revelation recontextualized everything. His unexpected kindnesses, his growing attentiveness, the way he had fought to protect her from the media scrutiny. "Alexander," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't expect anything from you," he said quickly. "I know this started as an arrangement, and I know you have every right to—" Elena silenced him by pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative and sweet, as if they were both afraid the moment might shatter if they moved too quickly. Alexander's hands came up to cup Elena's face, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. When they finally broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against his, their breathing mingled in the space between them. The garden around them seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself recognized the significance of this moment. "I was so angry when my father told me about the arrangement," Elena whispered. "I felt like my life was being sold to the highest bidder. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being the man who bought me and became the man I was falling in love with." Alexander's eyes searched her face, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Elena, I love you," she said simply, the words falling between them like a benediction. "I love your strength, your integrity, the way you care for people even when you pretend not to. I love the man who sits with me in hospitals and buys violins for women he barely knows." Alexander pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair as emotions overwhelmed him. For so many years, he had believed himself incapable of inspiring love, too damaged by his ruthless pursuit of success to deserve such a gift. "I love you too," he murmured against her ear. "More than I thought possible." They sat together as darkness fell around them, holding each other and marveling at how their arranged marriage had transformed into something real and precious. The fountain's gentle splash provided a soundtrack to their whispered confessions and stolen kisses. Neither wanted the moment to end, but eventually Alexander stood and offered Elena his hand. "Come inside with me." Elena smiled and took his hand, ready to begin their real marriage at last. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same garden where she and Alexander had first confessed their love, but this time she wasn't alone. Alexander's arms were wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Their relationship had deepened in ways Elena had never imagined possible. The formal distance that had once characterized their interactions had been replaced by genuine intimacy and partnership. Alexander had taught her about business and finance, while Elena had shown him how to find joy in simple pleasures. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, walks through the city, quiet evenings reading together. The mansion no longer felt like a prison, but like a home they were building together. Elena had redecorated several rooms, adding warmth and personal touches that reflected both their personalities. Alexander's study now contained photographs of their travels and a small vase that Elena kept filled with fresh flowers. Their public appearances had taken on a different quality as well. The love between them was evident to anyone who cared to look, and the media had begun referring to them as one of the city's most devoted couples. Elena had also become involved in Alexander's charitable foundation, using her natural empathy and communication skills to connect with the people they were helping. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. Elena leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Just how different everything is now. A year ago I thought my life was ending, but it was really just beginning." Alexander tightened his arms around her. "Our life is just beginning," he corrected softly. Elena smiled, knowing he was right. They had found something rare and precious in each other, a love that had grown from the most unlikely circumstances. The renewal ceremony was Elena's idea, but Alexander had embraced it wholeheartedly. A year and a half after their arranged marriage, they wanted to exchange vows that reflected their true feelings, rather than the business transaction that had brought them together. This time, the guest list was small and intimate. Elena's family, a few close friends, and Mrs. Henderson, who had become like a mother to them both. The ceremony took place in their garden, surrounded by the roses Alexander had planted for Elena and the fountain where they had shared their first real conversation. Elena wore a simple white dress that Alexander had chosen, and he looked handsome in a navy suit that brought out the silver in his hair. But it was the expressions on their faces that made the ceremony beautiful, the love and joy that radiated from them both. "Elena," Alexander said when it came time for his vows, "you taught me that the heart I thought was too damaged to love was simply waiting for the right person to heal it. You are my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life." Elena's vows were equally heartfelt. "Alexander, you showed me that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the greatest happiness. You are my strength, my protector, and my soulmate." When they kissed to seal their renewed commitment, their guests erupted in applause, but Elena and Alexander were lost in each other. The kiss was full of promise and passion, a declaration of the life they would build together. Later, as they danced under the stars to music played by a string quartet, Elena marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a sacrifice had become the greatest gift of her life. "No regrets?" Alexander whispered as they swayed together. Elena smiled up at him, her heart full of love and hope for their future. only that it took us so long to find each other. Alexander spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy, and Elena knew that their real story was just beginning.